morning. My name is Latavia, and I will be your conference operator today. At this time, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Infrastructure Management Community webcast. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there will be a question-and-answer session. If you would like to ask a question during this time, simply press star followed by the 1 on your telephone keypad. If you would like to withdraw your question, press the pound key. Ms. Neve Cahill, Director of Practice Services, you may begin your conference.
Thank you very much. So this is Neve. I lead Enterprise Monitoring and Management Services for North America for CA. And today I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about what it means to actually deploy SDN and NFV and have it be successful within your environment. So whether you're an enterprise customer or whether you're a carrier, the large environments and challenges of managing your network are only going to grow as we deploy technologies like SDN and NFV. So today we're going to cover some strategies for addressing those pain points, things to think about going forward with your own strategies internally, as well as other things that we've observed within the industry as a whole. So I think we're all aware application economy is equal to exponential data growth. So whether you're at home watching Netflix and pulling down vast amounts of video data, or whether you're at work, there's a lot of data growth, and just managing that and being successful with network management in this environment is becoming ever more challenging. And it's also becoming challenging because increasingly IT is a part of the public space of your company. So if your mobile application is slow or you have network performance issues internally, it can potentially impact how customers perceive your product, your company reputation out in the marketplace. And so network performance is really key and really tied to the public's overall perception of you as a company. So as we go through and we see these challenges cropping up, they also become opportunities within the network management space. So customers that we've seen who are very successful in this area look at these challenges and see them as an opportunity to grow and enable the business, right? So you have ever-increasingly dynamic consumer and business behaviors. Your lines of business want to roll out new capabilities to your end customers. You need to enable that. Of what does SDN and NFV do for you as a company in that space? As network management teams, how do we ensure that end-to-end quality of service now that you have an increasingly complex topology from a fault and a performance perspective? So, hey, my OpenStack environment is not behaving in a stable manner. Where exactly is that fault occurring, or where is that resource starvation occurring? You have an extra layer of topology or topologies on top of your traditional network equipment that you now need to be concerned about. With SDN and NFV, you have the capability to do dynamic service chaining, which is great, but now you also need to automatically update your monitoring and account for those dynamic changes within your network. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you can adopt strategies to really make sure that you cover that dynamic nature of both SDN and NFV. And then you can scale, integrate, automate, and do zero-touch monitoring. Those are really the keystones of how you're going to be successful within the SDN and NFC space. It's really around automation. So as a whole, our industry talks a lot about service orchestration and automation from a service turn-up perspective. So it could be something as simple as, hey, I'm running out of space on my SD-WAN. I can dynamically spin up another WAN link. But from a monitoring perspective, how do you make sure that that new capacity on your link or your additional links are now automatically picked up by monitoring? And that's where the zero touch and the automation aspect of your approach comes in. So what exactly is SDN and NFV? So if you think about SDN, it's really, you're still separating the data plane from the control plane. And it's really all about the programmable network. So think about SDN as basically the ability to spin up an additional WAN link using a REST API call. So rather than having to go out and have, Verizon spin up another link for you, you can go in and either Verizon can programmatically provide you an SDN WAN link, or you can do that yourself within your enterprise environment. If you're within a telco environment or a carrier environment, similar capabilities. NFV is really about virtualized network functions, where you're taking a network function such as a router or a load balancer or a firewall, and you're virtualizing that capability into, essentially a virtual machine. What that allows you to do is really standardize your network equipment on x86 blades rather than having to go out and purchase, specialized hardware to support your network. You now can start to introduce a much more homogenized and standard IT type environment rather than really your traditional network stack. So there's a lot of capabilities there, but also there's a lot of challenges that come with these new capabilities, right? So if you think about this stack and managing it, the three areas I personally break this down into are fault, topology, and performance management, right? So from a fault perspective, you may have an alarm that occurs that's impacting a certain area of your service chain. So understanding what the impact of that alarm is, which customers it's affecting, where exactly that alarm is occurring is extremely important. I'll give you an example. So if you have a virtual CPE, which in the next one of the upcoming slides we'll talk about what the use cases are for NFV and SDN, and one of them is virtualized customer premise equipment. If you have a fiber cut that cuts your connection to your virtual CPE, you will show that CPE is down, obviously, but it's still the physical infrastructure that's really underpinning that relationship that's impacting that endpoint. So understanding how all those pieces knit together. In terms of performance, keeping track of what your underlying infrastructure capacity is as you spin up virtualized network components is extremely important. And we've seen a number of different scenarios where the OpenStack or the NSX environment becomes starved for resources and becomes unstable, but the customer is not really sure where exactly that's occurring, because just because you can spin up 1,000 instances of a particular virtualized network function does not mean it's a good idea to do so. So we'll talk a little bit about risk and change management, but that's where change and release processes become a whole lot more important. Just because you can spin up a virtualized instance of a function doesn't mean that you should be doing so completely dynamically. It's still very important to follow your standard change management processes. So bringing these all together, you'll see this whole stack that we've laid out here that comprises really this new virtualized network stack. Also, in terms of capacity optimization, you want to make sure that you're not, over capacity in your environment. Where exactly within the service chain any performance issues are occurring. So here's the typical use cases that we see out in the field for SDN and NFV. So virtual CPE, so basically, carriers, telcos, et cetera. What this allows them to do is rather than giving their customers a router or a traditional endpoint, they'll give them just an x86 blade or some kind of standardized hardened hardware that is server-based rather than just pure router-based. What that allows the carrier to do then is to spin up capabilities such as virtual PBXs, email services, firewalls, and other things. And from a business perspective, they can dynamically define those services and decide that they'll offer it and roll it out to their customers. And then, that's dynamically available on the virtual CPE. They don't have to do truck rolls. So there's a lot of savings and a lot of business optimization that comes from that standardization and automation. Within your software-defined data center or within your SDN core or WAN, obviously you have the ability to spin up WAN links if you need additional capability, rather than going out and having to run additional fiber or connectivity within your data center, everything's already provisioned, and then you can just provision additional links, cross connects, et cetera, through software-defined API calls. So Agile Operations today, I think we're all familiar with this kind of environment, right? So you have on the left-hand side an alphabet soup of acronyms and complexity that we have to deal with every day. So IoT, SDN, and NFV are obviously right up there at the top. There's all these changes that are coming down the pipe in our network environments that we have to deal with. And then on the right-hand side, all of your regulatory and compliance requirements, those don't diminish. If anything, they're getting more strict, and we really have to adhere to those frameworks. So we can't just forget about the right-hand side of the picture either, even though we want to enable the business and be dynamic. These frameworks and the governance that comes with them doesn't just disappear. So the customers that we've seen who are most successful in this space are customers who have taken their core capabilities and rather than just being a monitoring team, really started to work across the silos of their organization to become a business enabler. So really reaching out and talking to the lines of business, understanding what they're doing, enabling them to roll out services more dynamically, and at the same time lowering their risk. So whether you're talking about a large internal environment or a customer-facing environment, being able to really enable the DevOps side of the house in terms of deploying new business services really is what's really the difference between just simply being an operations team as opposed to being a value creator within your company today. So this is a very important tier here. So as you go up the stack, if you think about it, in network monitoring today and network performance, we're at a key point in the network. There's lots of different data that you can gather there, and there's lots of different enablements that we're capable of. And when you talk to lines of business, understanding, what they're looking at, what they need, what kind of information they need about the network in order to enable their conversations with your customers is extremely important. So for example, an application might be really where you're seeing the most mobile traffic from on the mobile application side, right? And how that's exactly routed through the network, how that's impacting mobile users of your application. From a telco perspective, obviously, and understanding just what end users are doing on the network overall. Are they having an optimal experience? Because within telcos and mobile wireless, really the network performance is representative of the company's reputation in the marketplace, but also companies that have solid network performance in mobile wireless typically make more money per user than a company whose network is not well performing, right? Because if you think about it and you're billing by data and by bits per second, basically if you can push more data through your network, you're going to make more money off that network, and that's what they're looking at from an ROI perspective in terms of network investment. In terms of monitoring complex networks, I put this slide in here. It doesn't specifically refer to SDN or NFV, but the guiding principles that were true for complex networks are even more true for SDN and NFV, right? So defining and standardizing the services that you're monitoring. So understanding, as your lines of business are going out and selling services, what exactly you need to enable on your side in terms of monitoring to support those services. So whether it's new technologies that they're onboarding into the environment, different KPIs that you need to be watching, and really understanding what that data model is really key. And then on the other side, understanding what those outputs are. So you have a new technology, it's onboarded. What dashboards do you need to be seeing? What faults need to be raised? Who needs to be notified? Who needs to get automatic reports, et cetera? And just understanding the stakeholders and the personas within your company and what their requirements are is really key. From an automation perspective, the more zero touch you can be, the happier you will be, because if you automate things, then everything is just going to cook and happen on the back end. If you roll out an additional virtualized network function, no harm, no foul, that will as long as it follows the proper change management process, that will be onboarded into your monitoring environment automatically. And as long as it follows certain standards, it should get a standard monitoring template applied. Insofar as you can, one of the challenges with your existing investments and existing monitoring tools is older monitoring tools tend to be very siloed. So especially within telco environments, you find point solutions that are focused on one particular area of technology or one particular vendor. And so with SDNNFV, it's very important to be vendor agnostic and have visibility across the board. And so we can do that by leveraging your existing investments and tying them all together and integrating them. So whether it's actual data repositories from your element management systems or other data sources, configuration repositories, so you can enrich data around your circuits, your links, and what's running on them. It's very important just to break down those silos between the tools and bring them all together. So whether you're looking at service orchestration for SDN and NFV, or you're looking at operations and monitoring, really the same holds true. So you want to look for solutions where there's a coherent library of integrations that's available to you. Understanding your end user needs, this maps back to the personas and understanding what, whether it's your executive teams or your IT teams, what exactly they want to look at. And then finally, network visibility and performance, obviously. The whole end goal here is to reduce the risk of what you're doing while increasing your service quality and visibility into what's going on in your network. So if you take those challenges and apply them to SDN and NFV, well, it becomes even more complex, right? Because if you're a telco customer, you now have the ability with these new technologies to provide self-service to a customer through a customer portal. Well, from a monitoring perspective, that really means that all that automation and the zero-touch configuration needs to be very tightly integrated, because if a customer can spin up a link at their will or increase their bandwidth, there's a number of different steps there that need to happen to ensure their service. And so, typically you'd have a very heavy process where you go into the back end and you say, okay, we're going to allocate more bandwidth to this particular link, and then that gets reflected in their bill. Or if you're looking at, for example, SD-WAN for your enterprise architecture, making sure that that updated link allocation is reflected in your environment. It was a much more manual and much more heavy process. Now with these new technologies, you have the ability to provide those services to your customers, but we also need to make sure that those settings are updated automatically on the back end. So service orchestration is great. It's also very important that automating the monitoring of those updated settings is a part of that orchestration process as well. So very often we're seeing that, spinning up new services is great, and that's there, but then you look at the operations side of the picture. So whether you're talking about service orchestration or an individual domain orchestration, it really depends, and there's different approaches to this, right? So you can have a service orchestrator is basically an orchestrator that enables your service chain end to end, and then it might go down into individual domain orchestrators, and what that means is it could go into, for example, OpenStack, and it could provision a virtualized network function, but then it could also go across and spin up additional bandwidth on another link for the same customer. So making the service orchestrator ensures each and every step of that process, and then the domain orchestrator would be, for example, the piece that orchestrates OpenStack. So they can be one and the same, they're not always one and the same. And then what's happening is we're very frequently seeing that the last steps in the process, so ensuring that monitoring is spun up for those updated links or updated capabilities, and that's really not happening. So we need to ensure that that is part of this process. So, for example, with CAVNA, part of what we do with that solution is we automatically pick up changes within the virtualized environment. So that monitoring update on that side does not need to be manually configured or even accounted for within the API. It's just pulled automatically from the underlying data sources directly. You also have auto-healing capabilities as part of your automation. So again, these are all related to, change configuration. I would say auto-healing is probably not that common of a use case right now because we're just starting to see deployments of SDN and NFV, but it will become more frequent as we go forward. So, as you're rolling out SDN and NFV, it's a disruptive technology. It inherently changes the way you're going to be managing your network. So you have traditional network engineering teams, and they're trying to get their arms around what exactly this means, how they're going to take advantage of it. And what I did here was I broke the challenges into 4 different areas. So people, process, tools, organization, process, and tools, and then what you can think about from a business strategy perspective. So from an organizational perspective, just like the tools, increasingly you're going to have to break down the silos between the teams, because if you're now rolling out virtualized network functions on OpenStack, for example, and networking teams are in charge of that, well, they either need to expand their skill set over into OpenStack, or you're going to need to involve the server teams, or both, which is what we're seeing quite frequently out in our customers, is an overlap between both, where the server teams are coming in and enabling the network teams as well. Again, the less siloed you are, the better. Understanding what the lines of business are doing and what they're planning is really key here. So very frequently, I don't know about you guys, but in my experience, the business decides it's going to roll out some new capability or a new application, and then T-1, when they're about to launch this new service, they suddenly realized, oh my goodness, we forgot about monitoring this. And then they scramble over to the monitoring teams. Well, with SDN and NFV and the zero-touch service provisioning that comes with that, it's really important to involve the monitoring teams up front. So being able to have that conversation with them and having a firm idea of if they're rolling out new capabilities to virtualize customer premise equipment, for example, understanding what that virtualized function is, what KPIs need to be monitored on that, and I'll refer back to fault, topology, and performance, having a firm understanding of what you need to monitor in each of those areas for that particular service. It doesn't need to be exhaustive. Maybe you just do 5 KPIs, right, and you watch those, or you have an understanding of the 10 key alarms. But modeling that up front and having a clear path for resolution when you receive a particular alarm is really important, because if you're getting different kinds of alarms, enabling the NOC as well and ensuring the operations level 1 and level 2 support teams are trained and really enabled in this technology is very important. And one of the key ways to do this is understanding the services you're rolling out to your end customers, what alarms need to be raised against that, what performance and throughput they need to look at, and how they react to that when there's an issue, right? So that's very key. And it was always important, but it's even more important now. It's not something that you can just forget to do. From a process perspective, again, just because you can spin something up on the fly does not mean you should actually do that. So change management processes still hold true. You still need to really adhere to your service management, release management, change management processes in order to clearly define the service up front. As you're rolling out, you're doing moves, adds, changes, deletes to your customers, understanding what changes are going on in the network, and basically having a firm idea and integrating with what I would call the DevOps cycle now within networks. So because the release cycles are becoming ever more rapid and customers are now expecting, the Agile methodology and updates every 6 to 8 weeks from their applications as well as, service capabilities, being able to integrate with that release management process and really understand what the business is doing is really important here. But also from an operational perspective, understanding your inventory, understanding the faults, the devices that are out there, whether they're virtual or physical, is extremely important, and those processes become even more important from a change and rollout perspective. So from a tools perspective, we talked a little bit about this. So traditionally, we've all been very, OSS is off in a corner, we're doing our performance and network management thing, and then, we're basically enabling the NOC and the operations team. Well, that's not going to work for SDN and NFV because you have this very dynamic, very, visible service chain that has all of these different underlying components to it, and so having siloed tools for each piece of that service chain really doesn't give you full visibility. So breaking down those silos between the tools is going to be very important. So far as an industry, we've been very focused on service orchestration, and I think because from a business perspective, orchestration and automation was really where most customers felt they would get bang for their buck or ROI on their SDN and NFV investments, which is great, but then you also need to enable the operations side, and so that's why we're having this conversation today. And then you really need vendor agnostic tools, whether it's orchestration or network management tools. Having a solution that really cuts across the different product sets is really key here. Because very often, just like your traditional networks, you're never going to be 100% Cisco or 100% Juniper. You're going to be a mix of different vendors, and just recognizing that up front and having a clear approach to each of those different technology types, nuances, et cetera, it's very important. So from a business strategy, how do you enable the business? So really working with the lines of business to enable their service updates and rollouts in a robust and reliable manner. So making sure that they have a baseline of when they provision a service for a customer, what the initial service performance is, and continuing from there. And then really seeing SDN and NFV as part of this DevOps adoption strategy. So, the ability to dynamically roll out services to your customers is great. So really enabling that and working with the lines of business rather than being the network team in the back, really not participating in that. It's really going to be a sea change within network engineering environments. So here's the service lifecycle. This is actually an older slide that I had that I took and adopted to virtual network assurance. So this is really the service lifecycle within a telco or a carrier environment, but also within a large enterprise environment, right? So I think the main difference will be around service order validation aspects like that are not going to be valid for an enterprise environment, but many of the other aspects are, right? So if you're thinking about how you define your service, how you roll it out, how you account for changes, we really need to extend that service life cycle to virtualized networks because there's still going to be some manual processes. There's still going to be steps where you need to instrument and configure physical infrastructure. And for the time being, until we get to entirely virtualized networks, which will probably never happen, there's still always going to be that step, right? So understanding your entire service life cycle end to end is really important here. And having visibility across the stack into both the physical as well as the virtualized side is really key here, because you could have part of a service chain that is, physically based, and then another part of that it's virtual. So that was really it for our SDN-NFV strategy session. If we want to open it up for questions.
Ladies and gentlemen, as a reminder, in order to ask an audio question, please press star followed by the 1 on your telephone keypad. Again, that is star 1 to ask a question. And there are no questions at this time.
We have a quiet audience, Neve. Thank you, everyone, for joining. So if you don't have any questions, that's fine. You can also continue the conversation in the community. Hi, everyone. It's Melissa. I just want to let you know that we have a couple really great events coming up. Tomorrow we have Service Operation Insight Concepts. So if you're new to SOI or interested in SOI, that's a great one. Michael Bohm will give a live demo, and he's with Engineering Services. And then on the 27th, if you're going to CA World or thinking about going to CA World, you don't want to miss this event because we'll be walking you through all the great things we have lined up at CA World, especially if you're an owner of Spectrum, UIM, Performance Management, NSA, or ADA products. This will be a great event for you to attend. All right, so there's no questions at this time. Neve, thank you very much. It was a great presentation today. Of course, the recording will be posted to the community more than likely by the end of the day today, if not first thing tomorrow morning. So check back and share with your colleagues and friends. Thank you for joining today. Thank you. Have a good day, everyone. Take care now.
Thanks, Melissa. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye. Thank you, Neve.
Ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude today's conference call. You may now disconnect.